Welcome back, friends. I'm Dr. Rakshesha, and we have already finished with some of the parts of chapter number 1, Reproduction in Organism. I just go in a brief. So what we have finished till now in the session 1 and the session 2. Up till now we have finished reproduction, definition, lifespan, difference between asexual and sexual reproduction, and asexual reproduction in plants and the animal. Now we go ahead with sexual reproduction. As we have seen in the sexual reproduction, or as we have seen in the difference of sexual reproduction, what are the characteristics of sexual reproduction? One of the characteristics of a sexual reproduction that it requires involvement of two parents. The two parents are necessary, right? In the case of a sexual reproduction. The second characteristic, what it requires, the process occurs with formation of gametes. Clear? So the second, what it requires a formation of a gamete. This gamete can be produced by either same individual or the different individuals of opposite sex. One will generate a male gamete, the other one will generate a female gamete. So these gamete formations are necessary in the sexual reproduction. Third, once the gamete are going to be produced, this gamete that leads to a formation of a fusion, and that leads to a formation of zygote. A zygote is going to be formed. See here, the zygote is formed by the fusion of the male and the female gamete. Male and female gamete fuse together, it forms a zygote. So this zygote has the characteristic of both the parents. These are the parents, and this is a daughter cell which is going to be produced. So this zygote has the characteristic of both the parents. So it not identical copies of a parents, but it is similar looking copies of parent. It is not identical, it is similar looking copies are going to be produced. Clear? Why it is producing the similar looking copies? Because it's a fusion of male and the female gamete. And the fourth one, it occurs into a higher order of organism. So I hope so it's clear to everyone. It requires two parents. It requires a formation of a gametes from same individual or the different individuals of opposite sex. Here the offsprings which are going to be produced, they are similar looking, but they are not identical or they are not exactly same, and it occurs into a higher order of organism. This we know. Now what is the another characteristic that it has? This, when you compare this sexual reproduction with an asexual reproduction, the sexual reproduction is a slow process, whereas the asexual reproduction is very fast. Sexual reproduction requires a time. Apart from slow, it is a somewhat complex process compared to a asexual reproduction, and it is elaborate process. That means it wants to say that the sexual reproduction is slow, more complex and more elaborative process compared to an asexual reproduction. Is it clear? So that is an introduction of sexual reproduction in living organisms. Okay, now we go ahead. As all of you know that the sexual reproduction is performed by the higher organism. So let's take some examples like fungi. Yes, fungi can also perform the sexual reproduction apart from asexual reproduction. Like a plant, it is a higher organism, it can also perform the sexual reproduction. Or animals, the higher order of animals can perform the sexual reproduction. We have learned this fungi, plants, animals and other living organisms in the 11th standard. So what we have learned in the 11th standard, we have learned their morphology, anatomy, physiology, etc. we have learned. And from the previous learning, we found that fungi, plants and animals, They are different in their external appearance, means they are different in their morphology. They are different in their internal structures. Like if you know that the animals and the plants, they don't have the same internal structures. They have a different internal structures. Even they are also different in their physiology, means a functioning of the living organism also differs from one to another one. So see, fungi, plants, animals, they are different in their morphology, anatomy and the physiology. But when we talk about the sexual reproduction in fungi, plants and animals, they share a common characteristic. What the common characteristic they found? Everyone, whether it's a fungi or plant or the animal, they are growing. After growing, they become so mature. Once they become so mature, then they can reproduce. Without becoming a mature, they cannot reproduce, whether it's a fungi, plants and animal. So if you look about the basic characteristic of any living organism, so whatever the living organism it is, first the living organism produced, then what we call it as a birth. After birth, it will grow up, it becomes a mature. After mature, it will reproduce. Then there is a death of a living organism. Clear? So there is a cycle. There is a birth, there is a maturity where it can reproduce, and then the animal ultimately dies. So this period which is going to occur in the case of a sexual reproduction, and when they can sexually reproduce, they sexually only reproduces when they become mature. When they become mature. Clear, students? So we will learn the basic cycle of the living organisms which are reproducing sexually. So I will just draw a basic cycle. First, it's a birth, then it's a growth, then it's a death for living organism. Now see how the birth occurs. Clear? Now you know that how the birth occurs in the sexual. There are two gametes. One is a male gamete and another one is a female gamete. This male gamete and the female gamete that leads to a formation of a zygote, a new living organism that is going to be produced, what we call as a zygote. Now, this zygote, once this zygote grow up, means the size of these cells is increasing. They become so mature, and a stage is going to be achieved where it achieves a maturity. After reaching a maturity, it will reproduces. So again, it can produce. It has it gains the capacity to produces the gametes, a male and female gamete, which again produces a zygote and new living organism. Once the reproductive life has been finished, a stage is occurred where the animal becomes a dead. Clear? And the cycle continue. A new living organism similar to itself has been produced. So based on this cycle, those animals which are sexually reproducing, their life is divided into three phases. There are three stages or three phases. First phase is called as juvenile phase. Second phase is called as reproductive phase. And the third phase is called as senescence, or you can also call it as aging phase. Clear, students? So the life of sexually reproducing organism divides into three phases. First is called as juvenile phase, the second one is called as reproductive phase, and the third one is called as senescence phase. Now we discuss each one in detail. First is called as a juvenile phase. What is called as a juvenile phase? The juvenile phase, it's a time period from birth to until it becomes a mature. Clear? As you already know that after a birth, the living organism grow up. Clear? And Once they grow up, they attain a maturity. So the time period between birth and they becomes a sexually mature, this time period is called as juvenile phase. The juvenile phase is a term which is more specifically applicable to animals. When you talk about the same time period in the plants, the term that is more applicable is it's called as vegetative phase. So what is a vegetative phase? It's same like a juvenile phase, but it's applicable to plants, and this is a term that is applicable to an animal. So it's a time period between birth and until they become a sexually mature. This is called as juvenile phase. This time period may vary from organism to an organism. Some organism may take 2 years to achieve, they remain in a juvenile phase. Some organism may take 5 years to be in a juvenile phase. That ultimately it wants to say that time period may vary from living organism to a living organism. So this is called as a juvenile phase. The second phase, it's called as a reproductive phase. Once the juvenile phase or vegetative phase that finished, the next phase starts. This is called as reproductive phase. That indicates the ending of juvenile phase that leads to an initiation of reproductive phase. But when you talk about when the animal transfers from juvenile phase to a reproductive phase, there is a certain changes occurs in the living organism. The changes may be morphological changes or the physiological changes. Let's have a look over the examples. What are the changes that happens? Take an example of a human being. Human being, once a birth, it grows and achieve an age of 14 to 15 years. This time period is called as a juvenile phase. Now they enter into a reproductive phase at the age of 15, 16, 17 or 18. Between these two phases, there are certain changes occurs in the body. The change may be a morphological change or it may be a physiological change. Like there is a development of a beard and the mustache. There is a development of a hair on the body. The voice becomes either shrill or it may becomes heavy. The change may occur depend on the sex. So these changes occurs when the animal transfers from the juvenile phase to a reproductive phase. And these are the these changes may be a morphological or it may be a physiological. And then they enter into a reproductive phase. So it's clear where the reproductive phase starts. The reproductive phase starts after completion of a juvenile phase. In the reproductive phase, the living organism becomes sexually mature and are capable of producing gametes. So this is called as a reproductive phase. Similar to like a juvenile phase, the reproductive phase of a living organism also vary from living organism to a living organism. Some has 15 years of reproductive phase, some has 25 years of a reproductive phase, and some has only 5 years of a reproductive phase. If you talk about the different living organism and the reproductive phase, usually all the living organism does not reproduces throughout their life. There is a reproduction during the specific season, and this is called as seasonal breeding. It's called as a seasonal breeding. Here the changes that occurs in a season wise. Like for an example, to take the example of a bird. The bird does not lay down the egg in continuously, but they lay down the eggs in a specific season. Usually they lay down the egg in the summer. So that indicates that they reproduces, but they reproduces in a season. But we also have some examples who reproduces throughout their life. Like for an example, human being. Human being, they can reproduce during the whole reproductive phase of their life. Clear? Like you know that during the reproductive phase, if you take another example, during the reproductive phase of placental mammals, in a placental mammals, if you check the reproductive phase in a females, this female may be grouped into two. It's non-primates and second one is a primate. There are cyclical changes occurs into a placental mammal female, and the cyclical changes that occurs into a non-primate females of placental mammal, this is called as estrus cycle. And the cyclical changes occurs in the primates of placental mammal, this is called as menstrual cycle. Clear, students? So during the reproductive phase of placental mammals in a female, there are certain cyclical changes occurs. Cyclical changes occurs in what? Cyclical changes occurs into ovaries, accessory ducts, and the level of hormones. If the cyclical changes occurs in this, in a female of non-primate placental mammal, such kind of a cyclical changes can be termed as estrus cycle. And the same kind of a changes that occurs into a primates of placental mammal, then it is called as a menstrual cycle. They can reproduce, and this is the reproductive phase of them. Okay, so that is the reproductive phase of an animal. That indicates that some reproduces seasonally and some reproduces continuously during the reproductive phase of their life. This is with respect to animal. I can also give you examples of a plant, because the plant can also reproduce sexually. So let's discuss a reproductive phase of the plant. You know that you might have observed the different plants, and if you have not observed, now observe onwards. See, when the flower appears on this plant, is it appear in the same month every year, or is it appearing in the season, a specific season, or it is occurring continuously? As the animal are the seasonal breeders and the continuous breeders, the plant can also be a seasonal breeders and the continuous breeders. And depending on that, the reproductive phase indicates. Here also changes occur as we move from juvenile phase to a reproductive phase. As we have a changes during the reproductive phase, similarly the plants also has a changes during the reproductive phase. They also develop a flowers, that indicates a change occurs in them. Once the flower develops, that indicates they are ready for reproduction, because the flower is the sexual organ of a plant, and that is meant for reproduction apart from the other uses. So if you compare the different variety of a plant, the annual plant, biennial plants, perennial plants. In annual and the biennial plant, you can clear-cut see this difference between vegetative phase. This is the immature phase which occurs in a plant. We are calling them as a vegetative phase because it's a plant, it's not an animal. If it is animal, then we call it as juvenile phase. The second phase is reproductive phase. And third one is senescence phase. So if it is an annual and the biennial plant, you can clear-cut see a difference between a vegetative phase, a reproductive phase, and the senescence phase. A clear-cut difference can be observed. But when you compare the perennial, you cannot see a clear-cut difference between the vegetative, reproductive, and senescence. You cannot mark a difference between them. But yes, if it is an annual plant and the biennial plant, you can have a difference in the vegetative, reproductive, and the senescence phase. Okay? But this is regarding the normal or usually what happens. But we also have exceptions where flowering does not follow this rule. And they are the exceptions. Or the unusual flowering is going to be reported. I will give you two important examples where in which plant the unusual flowering is reported. The first is called as bamboo species. This is an exception where the usual flowering does not happen or the unusual flowering happens. A bamboo species, it is a plant, it is flowers only once in a life. remember, this is the bamboo species which flowers only once in a life. That indicates that they can reproduce only once in a life. And after they reproduces, the flowers generates lots of fruits, and by generating after generating lots of fruits, there will be a death. They will be died. Clear? So this occurs in the case of a bamboo species. That's an unusual example. The second species, it is important one. Remember, Strobilanthus kunthiana, a plant which is commonly called as Nilkuranji. This is the biological name for Nilkuranji, Strobilanthus kunthiana. This is a plant which flowers every 12 years. Every 12 years this flower. So these are the examples where unusual flowering is going to be reported. Okay, so you have to remember these two examples. They are very important. Bamboo species, how many times it flowers in their life? They flowers only once in their life. They generate lots of fruits after flowering by reproductions, and then ultimately it will die. The another plant where the unusual flowering is reported is a Strobilanthus kunthiana, what commonly called as Nilkuranji. It flowers every 12 years, and the flowers of this Nilkuranji are blue in color. It can be seen in our Indian states as well, like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka. These are the states of South India. You can find this Nilkuranji or the Strobilanthus kunthiana. But yes, the flowering occurs every 12 years. The last time the flowering was reported in 2018. Before that, it was reported in 2006. At that time, it has attracted lots of tourists because it makes the hilly areas of these three states, Kerala, Tamil Nadu and the Karnataka blue. A very scenic appearance have been observed. So this is called as reproductive phases in a plant. Okay, so we have discussed the reproductive phase in both plant as well as in animals. Now we move ahead with the third phase of a life of sexually reproducing organisms. And this is called as senescence, or it is called as aging phase. Okay, senescence can also be called as aging phase. So what is a aging phase or the senescence phase? Once the animal or the living organism who has a capacity of reproducing sexually, now it loses the capacity to reproduce, and this is called as senescence or aging. In short, it is an older age or older time. So how would you define this senescence phase or the aging phase? So the senescence phase is a time period between reproductive maturity and death of an organism. Clear? This is a time period. Reproductive maturity means the reproductive maturity have been finished, and now they are about to die in a certain time period. So time period between this is called as a senescence phase. During this time, they lose their capacity to reproduce. And this is called as senescence and aging phase. Now, during this phase, how this occurs, whether it's a plant or the animals, this phase occurs due to changes in the levels of hormones. The change in the level of hormones that leads to changes in the functions of our body. That means physiology of the living organism gets altered due to changes in the level of hormones. Like as we get older, the metabolism in our body or the digestion process in our body becomes weak. There is a changes occurs on the skin, etc. So these changes occurs due to hormones, and this phase is called as a senescence phase. So clear, students? So those living organisms, those animals or the plants who are reproducing sexually, their life is divided into three stages: juvenile phase, second one is reproductive phase, and the third one is called as a senescence phase. So what is important in this topic? I just repeat what is important in this topic. Sexual reproduction has certain points, means it requires two parents. It occurs with the formation of a gamete. The gamete can be obtained from the same individual or the different individuals of opposite sex. The offsprings which are produced are not identical, but they are similar looking. It occurs in higher order of organism. Though the structures, that means outer structure, means morphology, or internal structures, means anatomy, and the physiology of the sexually reproducing animal may vary, but still they have a common mechanisms or the events they are occurring in them. The sexual reproduction process is a more complex process, more elaborate process, and it's a slow process compared to asexual reproduction. Just see a definition of these main three phases: juvenile phase, reproductive phase, and the senescence phase. The juvenile phase means it's a phase of growth, a time period between birth and when it becomes a sexually mature. This is called as juvenile phase. In a plant, the same phase can be called a vegetative phase. Reproductive phase, this means this is a phase where actually the animal attain a certain characters in their life and they become a sexually capable of reproducing a gametes and sexually reproduce. This is called as a reproductive phase. Some living organisms are the seasonal breeders, some are continuous breeders. Seasonal breeders can breed or reproduce in a specific season, whereas the continuous breeders can only reproduce the continuous breeders can breed continuously throughout their life. If you see the examples of birds, they lay down eggs in every specific season, not continue through their life. Second one, the human being, they reproduces throughout their life during the reproductive phase. During the reproductive phase, a certain cyclical changes occurs in the living organism, specifically in animals. The changes that occurs in the ovaries, accessory ducts, and the hormones of female of non-primate is called as estrus, and the changes that occurs into a primates, that's called as a menstrual cycle. I will also tell you the examples. Have a look of the examples of non-primates, which are called as non-primates. They are the placental animal. So the changes occurs into a non-primates. Examples of this non-primates are cow, deer, cat, dog, tiger. So the cyclical changes that occurs into these animals, that's called as estrus cycle. And the cyclical changes which occurs into a primates. So which are the examples of a primates? They are monkey, apes, or human. The changes that occurs during the reproductive phase, these changes that occurs is called as menstrual cycle. In annual and biannual plant, you can see a clear-cut differences in the vegetative, reproductive, and senescence phase. But in the perennial plant, it is difficult to find the distinguishing mark between the vegetative, reproductive, and the senescence phase. There are also examples of plants where the unusual flowering is reported, like a bamboo species, which flower only once in life and then they will be dead. Second one is Strobilanthus kunthiana, which flowers every 12 years. Clear? And the last phase is called as senescence phase, what we call as aging. Okay? So I hope so it is clear. This is what is a sexual reproduction. Now we start with a very short topic, that's an introduction of events in sexual reproduction. So which are the events that occurs in the sexual reproduction? So first the question comes to a mind. Variety of living organism can reproduce sexually, like we can, plant can also do, or other animal can also do, even the fungi can also reproduce sexually. We have different structures. We are different in our morphology, our look is different. Even our internal structures and internal organs are also different. Even physiology, means functioning of our also different. Still, when it comes to a sexual reproduction, we have a common pattern or common events they are going to be occurred. So ultimately, I want to say that though the sexual organ in different living organisms are vary, the basic events that occurs during the sexual reproduction, the basic events that occurs in the sexual reproduction, they are more or less similar. So the events which occurs into a sexual reproduction, it is divided into 3 stages for easy understanding. Because in a sexual reproduction, the main event is fertilization. The events which occurs before fertilization is called as pre-fertilization. And the last one is called as post-fertilization. Whatever the living organism it may be, if it reproduces sexually, the events occur during the sexual reproduction are broadly categorized as pre-fertilization events, fertilization events, and the post-fertilization events. So, what do you mean by pre-fertilization events? The name itself suggests pre-fertilization means the events which occurs before fertilization. Fertilization, that means it's a fusion of gametes. This is called as fertilization. And the last is post-fertilization, means the events which occurs after fertilization, that comes under the post-fertilization. The pre-fertilization events can be further classified as 2 events. First is called as gametogenesis, and the second one is gamete transfer. Fertilization is simple one, that's just a fusion of gametes. And the post-fertilization, after fusion of gametes, there is a formation of zygote. So it's a zygote formation. And once the zygote forms, it will grow up and there is a formation of embryo. And the process of formation of embryo is called as embryogenesis. So this is about the events, the basics of the events, or which are the events occurs in a sexual reproduction. Basic events are pre-fertilization, fertilization, and the post-fertilization. Pre-fertilization includes gametogenesis, means a formation of gamete. Gamete transfer, means the name itself suggests it's a transfer of gametes. Fertilization, it's a fusion of gametes. Post-fertilization includes 2 events, zygote formation and the embryogenesis. Here it's a formation of zygote, and embryogenesis means formation of embryo. So this is just an overlook of the events which occurs in a sexual reproduction. We will discuss these events in detail in the next